Hi, everybody. I know one of the great things so far in this conference is that things have been running on time. So I really appreciate that the room has been set up and we're all ready in here to have a conversation about energy. Um, my name's Scott Wenger. I'm Director of Government Affairs for Suncor Energy. For those who don't know, Suncor is Canada's leading integrated energy company. We span the full value chain of oil sands mining, oil sands in situ, upgrading, offshore, refining in Canada and the US. And for those who have seen them, we own the Petro-Canada retail network across the country. Suncor, we've been pleased to have a long history with PNWER, whether it be these annual summits, and obviously in different states and provinces. Speaking at the Legislative Energy Horizon Institute, Lehigh. I don't know how many people have been. Anyone has been through Lehigh in Washington? It's essentially a primer and a school on all of the above energy for new members of Congress and senators, et cetera, after the election. So if you ever have a chance to do it, I would suggest it. Yeah, so we're going to have a panel on energy security here. From a Suncor perspective, so we produce about 860,000 barrels a day. So that sounds like a pretty good contribution to energy security. We actually, just our company and the leases that we steward on behalf of Albertans have total bitumen reserves of approximately 30 billion barrels. If you compare that, I think with the whole Permian's between 100 and 140. So it's a pretty sizable chunk just for one company here in Alberta. The scale of our operations is similarly large for those who have been up to the oil sands region. I know some of you are going on a tour, I think tomorrow, of Cenovus's in situ site. But you may get some perspective on how large they are and the scale of the opportunity and the issues that we deal with if you have a chance as one of the tours to go to our mobile water unit, which is parked up behind the hotel here. And that's about how the challenge of where we're at now in terms of reclaiming all the disturbance. And it is a large disturbance, a great value producer for the country, and we aim to kind of bring it back to where it is. So I hope you'll have a chance to go and look at it. So with Canada's oil sands, Canada is blessed and poised to be an even bigger foundation for energy security for many decades going forward. And I'm fortunate able to introduce Alberta's Minister of Energy and Minerals, Brian Jean. And in addition to being the Minister of Energy in a province that would rank as having the fourth largest reserves in the world, Minister Jean is also a member of the Legislative Assembly for Fort McMurray, where most of these reserves are located. So he's intimately aware of the scale of the resource and what is required to economically and responsibly develop and share that resource with the whole world. And he and Premier Smith's government have taken some really strong steps of late, working across the border in the south, working across into Asia to make that a reality. And it's amazing how much has actually come to bear. Minister Jean was sworn in as Minister of Energy and Minerals in June 2023. And he's served a whole raft of roles: Minister of Jobs, Economy and Northern Development. He's represented the people of Fort McMurray in Alberta in a whole range of roles since 2006. Member of Parliament, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport, where I spent time at the same time as him in Ottawa, and a member, the leader of the opposition here in Alberta for a period as well. So he cares deeply about his community, his province, and the country, and how what we do here in Alberta can make the world a stronger, safer, and more prosperous place. And prior to public life, he was a litigator and a business owner, and we're grateful for the time and sacrifices that he's made to serve. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Brian Jean.
That's great. Who doesn't know what Suncor is? I was thinking Johnson & Johnson, Kellogg, Suncor. I mean, it's a great success story. Born and raised in Fort McMurray, much like myself. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm ecstatic to be the Minister of Energy and Minerals for the province of Alberta. It's no small thing to be involved in the energy discussion today around the world, and I think that it's great to just be talking to people that are like-minded and understand how important the future of our discussions are today and how important energy is to the world. The truth is that the Pacific Northwest Economic Region's 35th Annual Summit is an indicator of how great our relationship is with our best friends from the United States. We have tremendous interests in common, and we've done great things over the past century or two. And I would say we have many more things of value to be able to do in the future. The PNWER Annual Summit plays a critical role in bringing together leaders from across many different jurisdictions to strengthen collaboration on the issues that truly matter to our constituents. We have shared economic values and we have a shared economic future as a result of that. Energy, infrastructure, and trade. And all of these things are very important to people's everyday life. We need to recognize that and recognize, I think, how we can help people. Politics is truly about people. And the more we take care of the people that elect us and put us in the job that we have, the better off all of us are going to be. For Alberta in particular, this forum is especially important. Our province and states are deeply integrated through supply chains with many different products, shared infrastructure, and a common interest in ensuring that North America remains secure, competitive, and prosperous. And to do that well, we have to communicate with each other and make sure we get our priorities straight and focus together on steering our boat towards that direction. When we're rowing in the same direction, we can get there a lot faster and it's a lot more comfortable. And sometimes in the past, our two countries and many states and provinces have not worked together. We need to communicate more and we need to make sure we have more of these opportunities to make things better. We're living in a time when energy security has never been more important. Around the world, conflicts and supply disruptions have made one thing abundantly clear, and that is that countries are looking for energy that they can rely on, energy that is stable, secure, and responsibly produced. Energy like we have here in Alberta. It is exactly what people in the world need and want. The key is that if we work together and we communicate together, we can all take advantage of what Alberta, Saskatchewan, and all of our jurisdictions offer. Alberta, though, is my home, and it is also, fortunately enough, home to one of the largest and most secure oil and gas resources in the world. We have 9 times the amount of oil as Texas. Wow, that sounds like the same amount Texas has the same reserve size as Suncor. Is that true? Wow, that's pretty impressive. Suncor must be pretty impressive. I don't know if you've looked at the stock shares, and I don't have any Suncor stocks, but just the fact is the oil and gas industry here in Alberta, especially the heavy oil industry, has done amazingly well in the last 3 or 4 years, as can be indicated by what they've got in their financials. And that does indicate where the world's going. They're coming here to Alberta. Our energy is developed under strong environmental and regulatory standards, and it's produced in a stable democratic jurisdiction. That actually adds value to many of the people that work in this great industry. Energy security is not just about supply, it's about economic resilience, strong partnerships, and the ability to support communities and industries across both borders, across all borders. Canada and the United States share one of the most integrated energy systems in the world, supported by decades of cooperation and significant cross-border infrastructure. I would argue more than friends, more like family. Sometimes family doesn't always get along, but we know where we're going and we know we have to work together to get there. And Alberta is very proud to be the largest supplier of oil and gas to the United States. Our two countries have created a mutually beneficial relationship that has done so much for us, one that enhances continental resilience and ensures secure, affordable energy for people right across North America. But as strong as this partnership is, we also recognize that we need to do more. The last year has highlighted the need for a secure supply of energy for all our citizens. This also presents a great opportunity and the responsibility to contribute to global energy security, and I would argue to eliminate global poverty. To do this, Alberta is focused on expanding infrastructure and improving access to markets. For too long, limited pipeline capacity has constrained our ability to reach new customers and to actually fulfill our destiny and our opportunity to do better. This is changing. Projects like the Trans Mountain expansion demonstrates what is possible if we communicate and work together, unlocking significant new export capacity and connecting Canadian energy to global markets. At the same time, we're actively advancing new opportunities to strengthen both north and south and east and west energy corridors, ensuring we can move our energy safely, efficiently, and responsibly to where it's needed most. This is truly about more than pipelines. It's about building a modern energy system that supports long-term growth, investment, and security. Our goal is clear: to strengthen energy security at home, expand our reach abroad, and unlock the full potential of Alberta's amazing energy sector. Because when Alberta's energy can reach global markets, it does much, much more than drive just economic growth. It supports energy security for us and our allies. It strengthens partnerships with you and other businesses around the world and contributes to a more stable and prosperous world for all the citizens that we represent and many others. By expanding our market access and diversifying our exports, we are not only creating jobs and driving economic growth at home, we're contributing to a stronger, more resilient North American energy system and a more stable global energy future. That is the opportunity in front of us today, and it's one that we are going to fully realize here in Alberta, and I invite you to join us. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. Just before I invite all the guests to come up here today, I don't know for those folks that are from Alberta, but we've had a lot of announcements here in the last little while about energy security. I'd just like to make another announcement today. Just kidding. But you thought I was going to do it. Anyways, come on up, group, and let's have a discussion.
Well, you got me there because I thought, oh God, one more announcement. I joked, last week that there can't possibly be any more pipeline announcements. And then, of course, ATCO announced the approval of the Yellowhead pipeline. So we're definitely in a period of announcement, which is a great place to be, following what we often refer to in Alberta as a lost decade. So delighted to have this conversation, not only with Minister Jean, but also on my left, Kendall Dilling, who's the president of the Oil Sands Alliance, which is a consortium. I guess, Kendall, you can talk about it. Consortium of the oil sands companies, the 5 ones in Alberta. And also Erin Rolstad from Enbridge. She's the vice president of regulatory and mainline commercial strategy and liquid pipelines. And my name's Heather Exner-Pirot, and I work at a think tank, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, where I'm the director of energy, natural resources, and environment. So obviously we're all thinking and talking about energy security. My little joke is, we haven't just had a black swan event, we've had a flock of black swan events. And the Strait of Hormuz is only the latest. But, from COVID to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to the tariffs from Trump and the disruption of global trade, it's been quite a few years of disruption, of rupture, some people call it. And it's not only affected supply chains, but also energy markets. And even, as we speak today, there was, more bad news from the Middle East. It seemed like things had quieted down. Now the Houthis are saying that there's a maritime embargo against Saudi Arabia and the Red Sea. And Russia is down, I think, 2.5 million barrels of production. About half of their refining capacity is offline, and they're importing refined products from India, which is a big reversal from the past. So it's certainly an era where this is top of mind. When I think of energy security, there's usually 3 different things that people might refer to. One is your own domestic energy security, of course, fuels, but also electricity, avoiding blackouts, having reliability, and an age of AI. There's obviously a security aspect to that, to electricity. Sometimes we talk about cyber. I don't know if Dan's still in the room from Synovus, but there are cyber attacks on our domestic energy infrastructure every day. And if you look at what's happening in the Middle East and in Russia and Ukraine, there's physical attacks on energy infrastructure. That after military targets, energy infrastructures is the biggest target for those, and we have to watch for that in North America and our region. But since we're in Alberta, most of how we think of energy security is global markets and the ability to export based on those markets and expand our ability to supply reliable, stable sources in a world that desperately needs it. And so that's what we're going to focus on today with the guests that we have. And that's a good place to start. We'll kind of start at that broad geopolitical level and move a little closer to home. But I'm curious from all three of you, and maybe I'll start with you, Kendall, and I'll move down the line. With the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, with the volatility that we're seeing in global markets, not a lot of places can see it as an opportunity. We can see it as an opportunity. What do you think after all this, after the dust settles, what does this mean for the Canadian energy sector kind of in the medium and long term?
Thanks, Heather, and thank you to the organizers for having us here today. There's sort of an obvious answer here, which is any country who has been reliant on the Middle East for their oil and gas needs are now thinking, what does it mean in light of the fact that Iran with a handful of $20,000 drones can essentially choke off 20% of the global oil supply? That's a huge concern. But there's something happening even at a deeper level that, frankly, even in the industry, we're all trying to get our heads around. I think it leads to the same place, which is security matters more than ever. But one of the really interesting things going on, like if you talk to any technical analyst in the world right now, nobody can figure out why oil isn't $150. And they were predicting it'd be north of $100 till the end of 27, just based on what's happened already in the Middle East and the infrastructure that's been taken out. And yet that hasn't happened. And people are really trying to understand how that is playing out. And a couple of the things they're observing. One is that this now incredibly globally integrated energy system that we've created over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years has surprising resilience that, it's so complicated. Nobody could have predicted this, but, you've got lots of companies with large reserves, like, tankage and supplies for emergency. And those national inventories have been drawn down to mitigate some of this. But you look at China, who almost immediately when it happened stopped exporting any refined product. They kept it domestically, and they were able to fuel switch a shocking amount, getting a bunch of their refineries that would currently run off crude, largely from the Middle East, to NGL and other feedstocks from other parts of the world. And so, that global system has effectively mitigated what would have otherwise been like a crisis of epic proportions. And so, but even that then makes you think, okay, if that's telling you there's lots of oil and gas in the world and all the interconnectivity gives us real resilience in that system, it still comes down to the same question, though. Where do you want to get your oil and gas from, and where do you want your allies getting it from? And all of this speaks to North America's incredibly fortunate situation right now. Canada and US are both big exporters of natural gas and oil. And, from a geopolitical perspective, are viewed as very, very low risk. So even though, the second rationale there is probably a surprise for most of us in the industry, it still leads to that same question, which is, I have a choice. I have a choice from lots of places in the world to get oil and gas. Where do I want that to be? And I think most of the world, and certainly, in a growing world of allies and allegiances and hemispheric kind of influence, it's compellingly in both the United States and Canada's interest to provide those resources, not just for their own needs, but for those of their allies as well.
Erin, where are you guys seeing it at Enbridge with your liquids and think about the Mainline?
Yeah, specifically the Mainline too. One of the great things about our Mainline is it goes to one of the best customers in the world. We go to the US and we've had partnership with the US for decades. We have built up, a great energy resource and resilient markets there. When I think about the Strait of Hormuz and what that looks like from a Canadian energy perspective, I think we really need to lean into our Canadianness, and that's the hockey part. Let's, be really proud to be Canadian. Let's play some defense and let's play some offense. Number one, it is a fantastic time to be in Canadian energy. How many of you, all that neighbor that wouldn't talk to you before, all of a sudden they want to know about the new pipeline and new production? We all of a sudden are the cool kid on the block. Everybody wants to talk about us. But let's talk a little bit about the defense as well. You mentioned China. One of the things that China did is they built up their SPRs. And so they've kind of been insulated from the Strait of Hormuz. We need to start looking at that too. Like, what do we do as defense, as both Canada and America? And then offense. Canada, we have been sitting here so quietly on what is one of the best production fields in the entire world. And we've just quietly been waiting for everybody to come to us and realize how great Canadian resources are. We really need to be out there talking about Canada and what a secure source of supply with great policies and great infrastructure.
It is nice to be the cool kid, but all four of us on this panel are very tired right now after the last 3 months. But it's been much better to be in this position before. Minister Jean, how is this looking from, I mean, you're the Minister of Energy in Alberta. That's pretty envious portfolio you got. How's
Best job in the world. It is true. I wanted for a long time, and frankly, filling out a couple of dreams here. I think this comes down to basic, supply and demand situation. We have a window. I describe it as a window that's open. It's a brief time and time frame that it's going to be open for, and I think we have to jump through it as quickly as possible to change the supply chains. And I remember back to the time when I was a young man just out of university and selling products to Suncor, actually, in Fort McMurray, and going out to the plant site there and trying to sell Xerox machines and off supplies and printing. And that was back in the day. And one thing I noticed at that stage is once you change their process of purchasing and where they purchase from, they usually didn't change without a significant reason to do so. And what we need to do is look at Korea and Japan and our allies and friends around the world and say, hey, let's change those supply chains so you start buying from us, and then let's give you no reason to change. And let's make sure that we get those supply chains strong and resilient. 10 days to Japan and Korea instead of 30 from different places that aren't so friendly. Let's change those supply chains, get them in action as quickly as humanly possible. Let's move forward on our accelerated timeline to get pipelines built, and let's make sure we help our proponents in every step of the way, because this window is going to be closed and we're not in control of the draft, but we have to jump through it as quickly as possible. And that's how I look at this opportunity. We need to work together with industry, with other levels of government, with federal friends, and with BC, and make sure that we get pipelines to the coast as quickly as possible to find as many customers as we can. Great customer. The U.S. is a great friend, family, but the truth is, for the health of all of us, we need more customers that are direct customers of Canada.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. One of the things that we talk about is having great customers, and we heard it from almost every panelist today, how a strong economy and how our customers have great production, a way to invest, that's good for everybody. And we should be so confident in those customer relationships that we're not afraid to take another call.
So it's been incredibly volatile, Kendall, to your point. I mean, we've seen, Brent at $70 and Brent at $140 in the last 3 months. And it's hard to make decisions based on what we're seeing in this volatility. But yet in Canada, we are making decisions, and there have been a lot of pipeline announcements. Not another one today, but from you.
I could if I would.
And what a change, where for Canada, the pipeline gridlock was the problem. That was the bottleneck. And now we're in an opportunity where we're getting all these pipelines as such that challenge is how are we going to fill all of them. But it is a bet. When you build a pipeline, that's a 25-year bet, that you think there's going to be a market and a customer. So you guys are making these very long-term bets. That's in a time of great volatility. So I just, what do you think now needs to be done? We're having this new generation of infrastructure. It's great problem to have. But beyond the regulatory approvals, although you could talk about that too if you wanted, what do you think needs to happen to ensure that they're commercially viable and have sufficient supply to support them over the long term? And since it's a pipeline question, I'll start with you, Erin. And I want to congratulate them for starting construction today on their Sunrise pipeline. Some more pipeline news today.
There actually is a pipeline announcement today. We'll talk about that in a second. When I talk about pipelines, I'm going to start with a story. I say building major pipelines is like taking a family road trip. My husband always will pick this fabulous destination for the family road trip, and he thinks that's the hard part, choosing the destination. Doesn't realize you got to get 2 kids and 2 dogs in the car. And by the way, who's going to look after the cat? So when you're looking at major pipeline projects, sure, choosing a destination for the pipeline to make sure it's going to serve markets is really important. But there's a lot of other factors that go in there. Number one, are my customers going to show up? Do they have enough strength and resiliency in the policies that they can, produce the oil that's needed to fill that pipeline? Do we have the people that we need to build those pipelines? Do we have the partnerships to build those pipelines? One of the important partnerships that we can't forget is Indigenous partnerships. And that needs to be, I think we heard from Elder Bernie this morning, that can't just be consultation. It needs to be a full, engaged cooperation with those Indigenous partners. So we've got to think about not just where we're going. And by the way, don't you love National Lampoon's European Vacation? The dad chose the destination, which happened to be Wally World, which was closed. So we need to make sure that those markets are open when we get there, and that we've got everybody in the car that we need to get on board to do that.
Okay, I'm going to go to the newest proponent of a pipeline, Minister Jean, and then I'm going to go to Kendall after that on how he plans to fill it. So, Minister Jean.
Well, the first thing is that there's only 2 options. You either have too much pipeline and not enough oil, or too much oil and not enough pipeline. So out of the 2 choices, I'd rather have too much pipeline. We'll fill it. We have 177 billion barrels of oil at the current technology, and we just found another 2 billion a year or so ago. I predict that in 20 years, when we're worried about filling another pipe, we'll have a bigger reservoir, bigger reserve status here in Alberta than we have today. I think we're finding more gas and oil all the time, and we just have to update that. So as far as the filling, we have enough product to fill it. We just have to make sure that we have enough pipeline so that we're not where we were before, which is a differential that's blown out and frankly not getting proper value for our oil. I think our oil is a better oil. And now that we have a CCUS pipeline, we should get a premium price for our product. I really believe that, and I'm hoping that someday we will. But until we do, we should definitely make sure we have enough pipeline that we never have to look to see whether or not we have enough to get production. Our product is better. Let's get more of our product to market as quickly as possible and show the world what we can actually do from our perspective. Because remember this, folks, one thing that people don't really focus on is the geopolitical scenario in the Pacific can be solved for the most part with our oil and gas resources here in Alberta and Canada.
So I count 2.3 million barrels a day of pipeline. You're saying that's maybe not enough. We need to think about the next, egress after that.
It's never going to be enough. It's never going to be.
So Kendall, how are we going to fill 2.3 million barrels a day of pipeline egress in the next 10 or so years?
That is such a good problem to have. Many of us over the last decade have been, struggling with the challenges of stagnation, and now we're potentially going to be faced with the challenges of growth, and that's a way funner problem to work on. Let me say that at the outset. Listen, the national consensus that we now have around the critical importance of natural resources, for sure in Canada, and I know also in the US as well, and support for pipelines and provinces working together and provinces working with the federal government. I mean, this is absolutely a game changer and was a condition precedent to any discussion of growth. That said, I mean, it's not strictly regulatory and political things that have held up some of these big infrastructure projects. They still are challenging to get investor interest in because of the volatility in the world we're talking about. Oil sands particularly is more analogous to deep offshore oil and gas. These are like, 10-year kind of investment cycles. So from the time you say, okay, we're going to develop this project, getting through regulatory approvals, construction, and actually producing, it can easily be, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And investors are actually just saying, no, I have no interest in that because this world is going to turn upside down 4 times between now and then. And you're asking to bet on today's conditions that you have no idea what they're going to be like down the road. So that remains a challenge. But this is where government and industry have to work really closely together. And the MOU that we collectively signed recently really reflects that commitment to working together to figure this out. So, tax competitiveness is one good example. Adam Legge mentioned it on the previous panel. The U.S. Big Beautiful Bill was really aggressive in terms of capital write-off for, depreciation for capital projects across a broad range of sectors. And we've not followed suit with that yet in Canada. And so now that there's this kind of competitive disadvantage there. So we need to collectively, that's government's role to level the playing field on kind of the taxation and the fiscal take from these projects. But the reward for doing that is then these billions. And this value proposition we're talking about of building pipelines, building the production to fill it, and doing carbon capture and storage. This is conservatively several $100 billion in investment, and the economic benefits associated with that investment and the job creation and everything so far outweighs, governments being a little bit patient in taking their economic rent out of the resource. You got to give the developer a chance to recover their initial capital. And then there's lots of resource to go around to pay royalties and taxes and provide jobs and build schools and roads and hospitals and all that stuff we collectively value. But you got to get those upfront investment conditions right, or these projects can't proceed.
Did you want to?
Oh, I just wanted, I think you're tying into, we talked about the Sunrise expansion project and kind of all those details and all the kind of knock-on benefits that one of those infrastructure pipelines, kind of create. I just want to talk about the numbers if we can really quickly on that, because it so ties in perfectly. We just announced today we are breaking shovels on a $4 billion project in BC. It's going to provide 300 million cubic feet to BC homes. It will also provide fuel to the wood fiber project, which is a net zero project. It will add $3 billion to Canada's GDP, 2,500 jobs. It was built with Saskatchewan steel and other knock-on benefits, not to mention 38 Indigenous nations that participated economically in that for a 12.5% interest. So I think that's what success looks like when industry and governments are able to work together.
Now I'm going to, some of that may also end up on the west coast of the United States. Is that right?
It will. Part of the wood fiber LNG projects, they'll feel part of that as well. So it really is a not just a national project, but kind of a world economic project as well.
Perfect. And because I want to move to our region now. And of course, Canada's excited about the opportunities in the Asian market. Most Asian customers are 90% reliant on molecules from the Middle East. It's a growing market, a huge market. So it's a great place to move into. But I've never heard anyone in Alberta say they would like to sell less to the United States. Everyone would like to sell more. And in fact, the immediate plans are to sell more. The newest pipeline additions are going to the United States. I also understand after about 20 years, we're now, increasing exports of natural gas, that we also hit all-time highs for natural gas exports to the United States to feed that growing electricity demand. So for you guys, talking to, our customers and our friends in this room, how are we balancing that idea of strengthening our energy partnerships in Asia, which the West Coast Rail Pipeline is focused on, but also, building on what we have with the United States. And it's not only Alberta's biggest export, it's Canada's biggest export as well to the United States. What does that look like for you? How do you balance those two?
Well, I think communication, and just if I can make note that the companies on stage have talked more than the politician, which means they have more to talk about that the politicians have gotten out of the way of, like projects. And so I just like to point that out, because most of the time politicians do more talking than industry representatives. And it's exciting to see you folks up here actually talking about projects that are in the ground. And I think it's not unlike what we have to do with our friends in the United States and our allies overseas. We have to communicate more. What has shocked me a bit as the energy minister is just the lack of knowledge about what our resources are. Just the fact that we have the resources in the first place, but let alone how we are producing those resources and to what level of expectation we have our industry producing them. So I think we have a great story. We have to brag about it more. And that means communication, and communication will lead to mutual investments and opportunities between ourselves and our partners, whether they be provincial and state level or through industry with government. And the best thing a government can do frankly, is to get out of the way of industry. And, we have to regulate safety and the environment and some constitutional things here in Canada, but we've got that figured out. Now let's just make sure industry is pointed in the right direction and going hard at it. And in this particular case, the nice thing about pipelines is every direction is a good direction. So.
Well, I mean, Enbridge is the one going at it hard, and you would love to think of you as a Canadian company, but you're maybe the most North American company you can possibly be. How do you guys see this relationship, and where do you see this growth happening?
Well, I think, number one, we have such a tremendous relationship with our US customers, and, it's a great market to get to. We all talk about like access to Tidewater. When we have a or Canadian crude going into the US, you're accessing US refineries, you're accessing US industries, providing power to the US, which then in turn turns around and benefits our economy. You can also get down to off the coast in US. We just added another $1.8 billion of storage for Canadian crude specifically to get it off the coast in Texas. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity, but there's so much advantage in diversification. So I don't want to say America is the only answer, but I think it's an and. Like it's always an and. They're a great partner. They're a great trading partner. And we can look at diversification.
And the Mainline has been apportioned or full for the last year. Is that right?
It has. So it's one of those signs where, I think we always argued whether it's productions or pipeline coming first, but I think we're in lockstep. Every expansion that has happened in Canada has almost immediately become full. Part of that too, though, is because when we look at expansions and when our customers are ready for expansions, it takes a long time before that pipe is in the ground because of the regulatory environment. We need to do better in that. So we close the gap of risk of when we make an investment decision on pipelines to when production shows up.
And I would say, if I could, that we all have different shareholders. Enbridge has shareholders. Kendall, you have shareholders. I have shareholders, the people of Alberta. And so as the Minister of Energy, I have to look at, pipelines and egress and jobs and all of those things in a different light because my shareholders actually are the owners of the resource. And I would just point out that all of us have different strategies. And although your strategy might be the US, mine is to find as many customers as possible so we don't just have one customer, which leads to long-term uncomfortable opportunities from time to time.
Yeah, I'll agree there. What's it like having 5 shareholders, Kendall?
I know I'll be preaching to the converted here because I've heard multiple speakers talk about it and lots of people. There's the fact that we're here with 600 delegates. I mean, the people in this room who kind of do the real work, we're under no illusions that there's any scenario where Canada and the US aren't going to continue to be intrinsically linked economically and socially, politically, in every way. A marriage is probably a disconcertingly good analog for the relationship. And in any long-term relationship, every now and then you need a bit of counseling and you need to, a few bumps in the road aren't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you come out stronger for that because you did need to make some course corrections. And, I think some of these bumps we're feeling right now, in the long run, will probably just make that relationship stronger. Those of us who've been around for long enough know that ultimately physics and economics win and politics and policies come and go. There's a compellingly obvious reason why our markets have developed in an integrated fashion. It gives us resiliency that I talked about that we're now seeing at a global scale. And the US should not in any way be threatened by us getting more barrels to Tidewater because a bunch of those barrels are going to end up in the US anyways. I don't know what it is about this continent, but the West Coast is a challenge for getting any kind of energy infrastructure landed. And the US has the same problem, right? And it's taken us a long time to get access to the West Coast in our country. But once you do, it's, there's this great Asian market that we're geographically really, really well situated to access. And that, guess what, like has been said, is, Japan and Korea, allies that we want to be supporting and strengthening. And a lot of that oil and gas is going to end up in the US as well, California and elsewhere. So like this, and in the meantime, guess what? Enbridge is expanding into the States. Bridger South Bow is expanding into the States. Like this really, I can't stress enough, is not an either or kind of thing. This is an all the above, and it's a win-win.
So we're all kind of oil people, but if we think about the PNWER region, it's not oil demand that's going to grow here. It's natural gas demand that we're actually seeing growing within our region. Oil is more of an export story. So what are you guys seeing as the outlook for natural gas in this region? We can talk about LNG, AI, and then Kendall, I want to get into condensate and that because people don't always appreciate the role that the oil sands play in demand for it. But why don't we start with you, Minister, and we'll go down the line again. How natural gas is looking for you?
Well, natural gas is big in my department right now. We've been tasked to fix some of the issues that are currently plaguing natural gas in Alberta, in particular in the southeast and central portion of Alberta. It's the cost of production is up and they're really stranded. A lot of our gas resources are stranded. So we're looking at different things we can do. Obviously talking to NGTL and the federal government somewhat in relation to some of the boring stuff with regulation. But more than that, we're looking at infrastructure plays or other things that we will need to do in order to make sure that our natural gas gets to market. Now, how we get it to market is one of two ways, either pipelines or else we do data centers and sell bytes and bits and make sure that we export it in a different way. And that's the same as oil, to be honest. I have a long-term vision of not just an export story for oil, but some of those 6,000 products like carbon fiber and asphaltenes and other products that we can make from this amazing resource are actually manufactured and exported in a more refined and upgraded product than it currently is. And I think natural gas is the same opportunity. We have to think about the petrochemical situation with Dow. I think actually, speaking of Kendall, the opportunity for the Pathways pipeline now to be actually a corridor of industrial carbon sequestration where, many different industries could along that 881 route, which is the highway, by the way, which joins Highway 36 from the U.S. border, the wide lane highway could actually be a corridor of industrial CCUS operations and could be a real competitive boost to some of the companies out of the U.S. and Korea and Europe that want to take advantage of that. So I would just say to you, I think we have to be more innovative and creative, but work with industry to try to tag some of these things. And I think there's a long-term tremendous benefit to relocate here in Alberta and to get more export capacity of not just the raw product, but refined products of both oil and gas.
I thought you were going to say a lot more F-150s.
A lot more F-150s is good.
Okay.
I have 3. Is that really enough?
This is Chatham House rule here.
I don't mind at all. I drive a lot. I don't fly. I don't burn that jet fuel. So
how are you guys seeing natural gas demand growing here?
Well, I'm going to be completely honest. Usually when you start talking about natural gas, I'm an oil person and you'll lose my attention span, except for how integrated NGLs are with heavy oil production. Not a lot of people know this, but heavy oil is there, like it's exactly that. It's very heavy and it's hard to move through a pipeline. So we need to add diluent to the pipeline. Diluent is produced along with NGL production. When we look at adding more oil, especially going off the West Coast, that diluent that we put into that pipeline does not come back. And so there will be a real demand as we look at more crude oil exports and adding more crude to the market. There'll be a real demand for more NGLs to supply that diluent that helps the crude oil might work in the pipeline. So selfishly, that's how I'm looking at natural gas and how it will help oil production.
Well, you also took selfishly Kendall's answer.
I'm so sorry.
So I'm going to reframe it a little bit for you, Kendall, because I'm seeing it coming from 3 spots. One is AI. One is electricity use, and part of that's driven by air conditioning. And we're seeing the need for that. And then four things. So then LNG, and there's obviously going to be more LNG, terminals coming online and drawing more demand. We expect an FID on LNG phase 2 very soon, and hopefully Silicium soon after that. But the one that falls under the radar, which Erin, alluded to, was the condensate and the diluent that you guys use. So if we have 2.3 million barrels of oil more, that's going to be a huge demand driver for natural gas and liquids in this region. Are you guys worried? What is the infrastructure and the supply look like from that perspective?
Yeah, we are worried about condensate supply, frankly, to grow production to those levels. We don't have line of sight to it right now. Part of the problem is you're actually constrained on what you can do with your natural gas. So for non-industry people, when mostly in the Canada and the US in these big shale plays, when you're drilling for natural gas, it's really the liquids you're after. The methane, the natural gas itself is almost a waste product, and you're usually limited in how many liquids you can produce because you've got nowhere to put the gas. Now, the US has done a much better job of than we have in Canada in building LNG export capacity to take a bunch of that gas out of the system so that it can support more drilling. We've got some LNG happening in Canada now and several more along coming, and that's good because we need to find a home for that gas in order to continue drilling and find the liquids we need for diluent, for oil sands, but for a whole bunch of other purposes. If you'll allow me just a real brief aside here, I don't know if we have any Malcolm Gladwell fans in the audience. Another Canadian export, by the way, you're welcome. If you ever read his piece on David and Goliath, right, he makes a really compelling case that we've thought about that story wrong for all our lives. We think of it as the underdog who overcame all odds to beat the big giant. But if you actually start dissecting that story, Goliath never had a chance. He was, this big guy comes out with a sword wanting to fight hand-to-hand combat, and David stands 50 feet away and starts winging rocks at him until he gets him in the head and kills him. And, the Goliath kind of brought a knife to a gunfight. And so, where Malcolm Gladwell goes with that is you've got to learn to find opportunity in being the underdog. And natural gas has been a bit of an underdog because it's been almost a glut of it in North America. Prices have been very low. So it's been hard to make business work around that. And it's been bad for government revenues too, because when prices are low, royalty revenues are low. But sometimes you got to make lemonade, right? When you get lemons, and what can you do with cheap natural gas? Well, there's a ton of great things, and you mentioned a bunch of them, Heather, right? I mean, the whole petrochemical industry and a whole bunch of expansion that we see happening is because they know that there's going to be a good, reliable, affordable feedstock there for a long time. Power generation. I mean, if there's so many things we're talking about that are collectively, US and Canada, we need to probably double our grids capacity in the coming decade. AI, I mean, everything to do with the power gen to support AI and data centers. So we're going to find good uses for that quote unquote cheap natural gas. And that's going to be hugely important to all of us. And then again, to this integration point, that once we find home for that gas, then you can produce that many more natural gas liquids. And that's becoming a valuable feedstock also to Asian complex refineries. And I mean, it's just on and on the opportunities that come with natural gas.
I think it's so interesting that everyone needs natural gas to succeed, the NGLs to succeed, the oil to succeed, that you guys really are independent and the pipelines move all that. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to move to the audience questions. I have a bunch on my Huba app, but if you had a hot pressing question, feel free to pose that in the app. And all the comms people in the room, press the thumbs up on all the questions that you want me to ask. So on the Indigenous partnership, it used to be really essential portion of the conversation. And we are talking about energy security more and exports more. But I don't think it's because Indigenous partnerships are less important. I think it's become so normalized in the sector in the last 20 years that it isn't something that we have to convince people to do anymore. It's part of how we do business. So for the three of you, and I'll start with you this time, Erin, because you guys are such leaders in this. What does the meaningful Indigenous partnership look like today in 2026? How has it evolved? And how do you think this is going to look for this next wave of build out? What is that relationship do you think is going to be in these next 10, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, we used to talk about Indigenous consultation. Indigenous consultation, by the way, is the absolute bare minimum. That is the bare minimum. And so that's not what we're starting today. These need to look like real integrated partnerships. I've had the rare opportunity to work on some of these Indigenous partnerships at Enbridge, and I'll share just a couple stories of how meaningful it is, not only to Enbridge, but to our Indigenous communities. One of the elders in the communities that we were working with, he said to me one day, he said, Erin, he says, I don't want to be managing poverty anymore. I want to start managing success. Managing success means working in partnership with those Indigenous nations. Another Indigenous leader said to me one time as she's coming into a meeting, she says, I'm sorry I'm late. She says, I was on a really difficult call. I had to make a decision, a $30,000 decision on whether I could send one of my members to treatment. And she said, this partnership is going to mean that I don't have to wait for government policies to come through. I can independently make that decision. So it looks like early engagement, real meaningful partnerships, and economic participation in the projects. Anything new and greenfield that we do in Canada really should have that partnership there. And the government has shown up in meaningful ways with Indigenous loan guarantee programs, and they've been part of that conversation as well. So we're really thankful, and there's been real progress. There is still so much more to come, though.
I just want to ask you, Erin, because people sometimes are skeptical or cynical about it. Do you see business value to having those partnerships and those equity stakes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, one of the things that is actually kind of really integral is we forget about Indigenous environmental knowledge. I grew up in Northern Ontario. We had a lot of Indigenous trappers up there. And I always think about, if we could tap into their hundreds of years of knowledge of how we manage our resources, that is just an untapped wealth of knowledge right there that we really should be looking at. And it's just responsible management. It is the right thing to do.
Thanks. Kendall?
Yeah, reflecting on Elder Makakis's comments this morning, which I thought were very good, but he said one thing almost just off the cuff that was probably most impactful to me was he said, I want to be wealthy. What's wrong with being wealthy? And I've often thought about that. Like we want wealthy Indigenous communities in both our countries. We do. It is in our collective interest and clearly in their interest to bring them out of poverty and to tap into the resource they are, but also then have cooperation and partnership instead of them challenging. And I know on both sides of the borders, those communities become very adept and have very good lawyers, and they know how to slow down development. As we're trying to capture this moment in time opportunity, the minister talked about, we can't fight with Indigenous communities for 5 years. That is, the opportunity will be gone. Venezuela will double, triple production, and we'll miss the moment. We've got to work in partnership with them. We have, thankfully, and speaking to more of the area I know in Northeastern Alberta, an incredible track record. We've been working with these communities for a long time, and they have developed into very sophisticated partners running very sophisticated businesses, and we do billions of dollars of work with them a year, and that is helping enormously. But yet, it doesn't change the reality that you drive into those communities and there's still an incredible disparity. You get some very, very wealthy, successful entrepreneurs, and then you get some incredible poverty that remains. And so I don't mean to make this out as a moral obligation. It is also in our best interest. We operate in those regions. They're our neighbors, they're our partners, and we want them to be successful, and we want them to be wealthy. Last time I checked, that's pretty much how a free market economy works, is people want to be wealthy, want to work hard, want to create value, and we've got to bring them in. And these projects are in Canadian lingo, we talk about Indigenous economic reconciliation. That is not a government job. That is going to be industry and these investments. That is the opportunity, and it's what Erin just talked about. I'll steal part of your story now, Erin. That'll fix you. One of those communities, Enbridge signed up recently 20 plus communities to a 10% ownership stake in their main oil system in Northeastern Alberta. And that is now providing residual dependable revenues to those communities. And that's a game changer for them. They've never had that. And one of the communities that was landless, actually, with the strength of that revenue stream that they can count on for 20 plus years, they went and got financed, and the government provided Crown land, made it available to them, and they actually now have land for their community and for their community members, like an absolute game changer for them. And that's just one of many examples of the power of these projects if we do figure out that partnership model.
Yeah, it just made me think it's one of those things that we change the story from we're doing something to them to we're doing something with them in partnership.
And I mean, this is very personal for you and it's your constituents and you've seen this evolve over the last 2 decades. So I'm fascinated by your perspective here.
Well, it's sort of like nuclear fusion. You can talk about it all day and you're probably not going to convince anybody of how it works, but this works, so why not use it? It's the secret sauce in energy and infrastructure across Northern Alberta. And I would say Suncor and Syncrude have done an amazing job on hiring policies for years, actually for decades. And it works. So if it works well, why not use it?
Great. Okay, now I'm getting to the audience questions. This one I hope isn't controversial. I'll give you guys the opportunity to answer it, but the top rated question is really about that Pathways carbon capture project. And of course, there has been criticism, well, it's expensive. How do you guys, I'll start with you, Minister, and then go to Kendall, and then Erin, if you want to jump in here. How do you explain the need or the benefit of that carbon capture project?
Well, first of all, I correct people. It's not hot air being put down a pipeline. It's actually cold air. So anyways, Alberta is blessed with amazing opportunities and amazing geologists and some folks that really know how to drill and sequester things in the earth. We've been doing it for decades. If it is real, just hypothetically, if this CCUS thing is actually effective, which, by the way, a lot of people think it is, then Alberta is best positioned in the world to be able to do it and do it effectively and actually make some money from it. So first of all, I think 18 million tons we've sequestered so far in two different major projects here in Alberta. We've done a great job on it and we're world class. So what's happening in the rest of the world? Well, the rest of the world is doing it too. I think there's 40 projects right now that are ongoing. There's a large number in Canada and the United States and places like Australia and Europe and Korea and Japan. They really believe in this stuff. In fact, I kind of find it interesting that Japan is going to build a billion dollar plus boat to ship carbon dioxide off the coast to sequester offshore. I mean, that's not cheap. So they're actually building it right now, and they're doing that. So they believe in it. So if they believe in it and Korea believes it and they've got carbon pricing, border adjustments and all sorts of things like that, I don't know how long is Trump around for in his administration, but I can see the wave going back the way it was. And if that happens, then we are amazingly positioned to take advantage of that. And I think that's where the premium price for the product comes in. Now, if you don't believe it, then, well, maybe it's not gone to waste because we've learned some new drilling techniques. We go deeper than we've ever done. We know how to sequester other products as a result. And Kendall's got a great job trying to convince people in northeastern Alberta what an amazing project it is. So we've done some great things. But I have to tell you, as a guy that's comes a bit from northern Alberta, but also, the environment movement, I believe it's real. It's real and it's working and it matters. And for us, it puts us in an amazing place. Not competitively, because the best price on carbon is zero, or at the lowest, what your customer is paying from other people. Your competitor is actually being charged. In this case, Carney wants to go ahead with it, and the Liberal government wants to go ahead with it. So really what we're doing is negotiating. And that's what we've negotiated. And so whether you believe in it or not, I don't think it matters. What matters is we're getting a pipeline, maybe two, and we're getting to be able to export our product to double the ratio we used to be able to do it. So for me, it's a great news story, and I'm really happy Pathways is going ahead.
Kendall, Oil Sands Alliance was Pathways Alliance until a few months ago. You just signed a tripartite agreement, or was released last Monday, outlining the details of how this would go ahead. 5 CEOs of the oil sands companies all signed it. How have you seen this evolved, and what do you think is the case for this carbon capture project?
So first of all, it's a very fair question. It is a lot of money to be spending at a time when competing heavy oil jurisdictions are not making those investments. And you can argue that the economy and sovereignty should be your most important priorities right now. What I think, though, we did was find the right balance. I personally still believe genuinely that collectively as humanity, we've got to do a course correction in how hard we're being on this planet across a whole broad range of environmental vectors, or we're going to have a problem with the way the population is growing, and if the whole world behaves like we behave, there we are going to see some real problems. But you have to still respect economics, the reality of cost of living for people, and physics in making a balanced transition. It's going to take time, and the last, I would say, 10 years, particularly on this side of the border, we had the agenda swing really hard left, really fast, to the point of, unrealistic, just kind of silly things that unfortunately now are kind of backfiring. So I'll just give an unrelated example. Like, a mandate to have only electric vehicles produced and available by 2035. I have no problem with EVs. I drive an EV. I think they're great technology, and over time, there's going to be more and more market penetration. But it's not going to happen anywhere near that kind of pace. And when you put in a ridiculous policy like that, it actually turns people off. And Canada did that across a whole broad range of areas. And we've collectively drove the cost of living so high that now your average Canadian who can't afford rent and utilities doesn't care about the environment anymore, and is pulling way down in priorities. And I actually think we're going to regress and stop making progress, which is not the outcome any of us can be looking for. The right thing has to be just slow and steady wins the race. And the project that we negotiated, the scope and the timeline, is reflective of that. It's at a reasonable pace and a reasonable size, such that we can still do something that is going to be a pretty impressive global accomplishment and prove up technology that's going to be needed across the world, and reduce, to use the Prime Minister's numbers. If we fully implement this project, it would be the equivalent of taking 90% of the cars in Alberta off the road from an emissions perspective. So this is impactful, but we're also not blowing our brains out. We're not doing this at the expense of still being able to build pipelines and grow production. It's all got to be done in balance. I think we found that balance. And in the long run, we're all collectively going to be better served by not totally abandoning the environment agenda just because energy security is now so important. They have to still be done in concert.
Erin, how do you see as a pipeline builder? I mean, that's a line of business actually for you guys. So and you have a full kind of North American view. How are you guys seeing carbon capture?
First of all, because I have a pipeline business, I'll hand Kendall my card after this and we'll talk about it. I want to bring it a higher level and talk about, in general, policies that chill investment. We genuinely have to compete for investment. I compete for investment with renewables, our gas pipelines, our other systems. All of our producers, they compete internationally for investment. So anything that we do that doesn't add a direct benefit and is kind of chilling to that investment community, we really need to take a moment and think about it. And I know I've got this really captive audience of policymakers in here. And so I'm going to give you my unsolicited advice. On my laptop, I have this sticky note that says, wait, why am I talking? And it's a reminder to say, if I don't have anything valuable to add, then maybe I should just, be quiet. I think for every policymaker in the room, I want you to put a sticky note on it that says, where? WAIR. Why am I regulating? And think about, what is the policy that I'm implementing? What's the end goal? And what does that do for our over global economy? So take it down.
And I would say that's a great comment, but and we do say that, but if industry doesn't tell us where things are wrong, and you have an industry, a government right now that really listens here in Alberta anyways, I have to say that. And to all of you folks, just contact us, send us an email, let us know where we can change things and tweak things, because it takes time to get to some things, but we can't do it if you don't communicate with us, and we really want to. You can make me look smart, and I'm always into that.
Love that. Okay, perfect. So we're just about the end of time. So one question for the audience that I'll just tweak a little bit for a good final question here. The question was about the market to Asia Pacific. And I just want to ask the three of you, maybe starting with you, Kendall, when you get excited about the next 10 years and the opportunity that's in front of you, what do you see as the driver of growth? What do you see as that thing that's going to be pushing us forward?
So unapologetically, I love heavy oil. There's lots of great oil and gas resources around the world, but there's only a handful of really big, well-developed heavy oil resources. And I would suggest that when you compare to where the other ones are, primarily Russia, Middle East, Venezuela, geopolitically, from a partnership perspective, Canada looks really good. And mostly that oil, almost all of it, has historically gone into the U.S. Midwest refining area, and the Gulf Coast, and built infrastructure to handle it and provide, a range of gas and jet fuel and diesel and all these products that are so important. As we've got our first few cargoes off of the TMX pipeline off the West Coast into Asian markets, they are in love with that product because they've got these big complex refineries, which are traditional refineries with petrochemical plant add-ons effectively. And that heavy oil feedstock is such a good feedstock for them because it can just produce such a wide range of products just because of the nature of the hydrocarbon molecules. And so I think, as this world transitions, you're gonna, like, heavy oil will continue to be in huge demand. And a lot of it is even for non-combustion end uses, be it, again, these petrochemical feedstocks, asphalt, like all these different uses. So it's a product that's been historically undervalued, and I think it's kind of coming of age. And Canada's sitting on so much of it, and we know how to technically develop it. We just got to create the right fiscal and regulatory conditions to allow us to move ahead. And this is a multi-generational wealth creation kind of opportunity. We don't, as Canada, we have abundant natural resources. We sit proximate to the biggest market in the world. This isn't actually rocket science. You have to try pretty hard to mess that up. And sadly, over the last 10 years, we took a reasonably good college try at that. But I think now, I think now everybody is kind of realizing, okay, these resources are important. They're needed around the world. They're needed for ourselves, for our allies, and that's the opportunity for us.
Great. Erin, where are you seeing the tailwinds?
Well, I think, first of all, whatever is good for my customer is going to be good for the pipelines. So anything that is supporting the economic growth for our oil sands producers, that's going to be good for the pipelines in every sense of the world. Diversification should not be a threat. We should have, this reliable energy infrastructure with responsible development. The diversification is not a threat at all, that all pipelines are full and all are doing successful, including, our strong economic partners in the U.S.
Great. And final word to you, Minister.
Well, my good friend, Minister Tim Hodgins, our federal minister, I will quote him on this. We're getting a VLCC to the west coast of Canada. What more do you want? Well, I'd like it about 3 days faster a journey, because that's about $1 million for every 10 days. It's great. We're going to have a new terminal in and around Langley and that area. I think it's great. It's great for the U.S. market. It's great for some other folks. But if we moved it up to the north part of northern British Columbia, and by the way, we have a conservative MLA from British Columbia here in the room that's listening closely to energy, because it's very important to our entire country and especially the province of BC. But I think the closer we are to our market, which obviously the north coast of BC is 9 days away from our closest Asian friend, that's a lot cheaper than sending it to India by about $3 million per ship. So the closer we are, the better it is for us. The more oil we sell, the better it is for us. And by the way, I did have an opportunity to say to Prime Minister Carney, this is one of 4 pipelines we need. We need 3 more. And he laughed and said, well, let's start with 1. So I just wanted to let you know that the conversation between the prime ministers, this one and the last one, is much a different conversation, which is so good for all of us.
So you heard here first, we're still working on Northern Gateway 2.0.
I never said that. I wouldn't want to be quoted on that one. I never even heard of that pipeline. What are you talking about?
A VLCC is a very large crude carrier,
Yes.
for some of you in the crowd.
Oh, 2 million barrels, right?
Well, please join me in thanking these tremendous panelists on this topic.